Hey, this is Bad Child, and you're listening to Tobin Tonight.
Welcome to Tobin Tonight. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me on this. I was really excited to talk.
I want to get into a few things with you because I do like when we have acts on just to kind of, have a general chat with them, but also like get a little bit to know them. Because I know with a lot of interviews per se, they'll ask you, your usual like, where'd you grow up? Who are your influences, which we'll get to. But on this podcast, which make it a little bit different, we kind of get into the act of like, what kind of TV shows were you watching? What kind of movies were you watching? Like, tell us a little bit about your childhood. So I hope you're up for that.
Oh, I'm open for anything.
Where I really want to start with is, because we had a few of these acts on as well. Like, we've had Tyler Shaw on, we've had Olivia Lunny on, that were all involved in this, Stronger Together movement. And of course, that song
Mm-hmm.
that they all teamed up to sing. But tell me a little bit about how you got involved in that project.
Well, Tyler reached out, and it just kind of seemed like a right fit. And I mean, it's really funny because Bill Withers has always been one of my icons personally, and so to be involved in that with so many terrific Canadian icons and whatnot, especially singing a song that is so close to me is a pretty special experience, I think.
Explain that a little bit further. Like, what was your relationship with Tyler? Like, did someone give him your information? Have you had like previous, uh, like run-ins with each other? Like, explain that relationship a bit.
Well, we work at with the same label, and it's funny. Like we've messaged each other on Instagram before, and been like, "Yo, I like your music," or they're like, "Oh, that's a cool thing." And, like we just hit each other up once in a while, and this whole thing came through, and just opened up my email one day, and it was like, "Oh, you want to do this?" I was like, "Oh my God, yeah, sure, that's incredible. Yeah, I'd love to do that, and it's such a great cause. It's like, you know what I mean? It was really organic."
Now, at the time, like when you were going through this, when you're like checking your Instagram messages, like did he let you know like who the other acts are? Because like when we've had him on, I had asked him like you had all these big acts on, like Sarah McLachlan, Justin Bieber. I think in that as well there was like Avril Lavigne. Like there were so many
Yeah,
that
it
I
was
look up to, and
great.
and I was just there like I was just there like so Tyler, like, did you let them all know what their parts were? Like, were there any egos? And he's like, no, man, they just all came together. But I'm assuming for like it's cool because it sounds very Canadian to me. Like for someone like say an Avril Lavigne who's accomplished what she's had, and like to help out just say the younger acts as well. But like, did you know who was going to be a part of it, or were you just like I'm game?
I had a vague idea. I remember they sent an email with like a few of the names, but a few of them were omitted. Like we didn't know. Like when it was released, I was like, "Oh my God, that Justin Bieber's on it." I had no idea. I think I was told Avril Lavigne, Brian Adams, and Buble were going to be on it, and it was like, well, yeah, sure, I'll sing with them. That's
Yeah.
a special thing, and it, it was just very like, oh, as it kept growing, it was like, this is insane. This is a cool Canadian moment to have been a part of.
Yeah, like I thought it was interesting from the standpoint of like when I watched it on TV and like when Tyler was mentioning about in his episode, I was just like to me it's just interesting that how would you say no to it unless like you had some other things aligned that it just wasn't going to work out scheduling wise. But I'm like, if it came across my desk tomorrow, and like I'm not a singer at all, but if it came across my desk of, hey man, like you get to sing with Buble, Levine, Tyler Shaw, I'd be like, they know I don't sing, but they're asking me. Like, okay.
Yeah, you're you're learning how to sing.
To me, in the podcasting world, that's as like, if someone's like, Conan O'Brien wants to be on your table for three, John Oliver, and you're like, absolutely. Where do I sign up to this? Like, why did you even ask? You just say yes.
Yeah. There's certainly some things you cannot refuse, like in this world. That was one of them. where it was like usually I like to think about my decisions creatively or whatnot, and put some time and effort. That one, I just as soon as I saw it, it was like, well, I don't even think I said yes. I think it was just so like
Yeah, okay,
I
win.
was like,
Like
okay,
now? Do you
when?
want me
Like,
now? Like how about now? How about now? And they'll be like, just easy, easy.
yeah,
I want to talk a little bit, of course, getting into the musical side of your career because when I was just doing a brief, I guess looking up some stats here, because what I like to do is treat every interview kind of like a Tinder date, where you know a little bit about the person, but at the same time it's nice to be surprised, and you'd be
mm,
surprised at how many acts are like, that's refreshing. I'm like, yeah, from a guy who's never actually got on a Tinder date. That's the way I broadcast it.
yeah, yeah.
It's almost like I almost feel like if I ever go on a Tinder date, I'm like, so I know a little bit about you. They're like, check please, I'm out. I'm like, well, why did you come here? Like, you know stuff about me, I know stuff about you. What's going on? But uh, it's funny because like when I did some research, like you had a song "Candy," which was used in the Netflix film "To All the Boys." "Blood" was used in an Apple campaign. "Breathing Fire" radio single in Canada. Like it seems like for someone you're what, like 23, about 23 years old.
Yeah, yeah. I'm 23.
Yeah, so like for someone that I'll call it young, to like all these songs are getting kind of recognition. Like it's kind of like a niche audience, which is interesting in the world that we look at things now. Like for example, if I'm watching a TV show and I hear a soundtrack in the background, I'm like, that's cool now to hear that soundtrack and want to like find it on YouTube. So like either your marketing team is doing really well or like someone deserves a raise over there because like to get this on an Apple campaign that's not just in Canada, worldwide, like having the
Yeah,
radio single in Canada, and then to be on a Netflix film, like having that song inputted there, and people are streaming it, watching it now, especially in COVID. So like they're gonna stumble across this music and be like, I'm interested. I like this sound. I like this person. And as corny as it sounds, it's like it's no longer cool to kind of be like say on a charts or always over everyone's face. So like when you find it's like the
yeah.
cool kids now are like, yeah, I stumbled across that on Netflix, man. It's like it's a really cool song, and then you're just like, all right. So that's where I feel like it's trendy. So kudos to you. But when you see all this, when this comes across your desk, like you got your song in this, you were going to put in an Apple campaign. What's going through your mind?
Honestly, a few different things. Like, what's the project? How does it align with me? Like, I mean, first off, morally, is like, what is it? Like, am I going to watch this and regret that it exists, or is it something that I? Because here's the thing: like, I could have the best opportunity come across my desk, and if it's like, if it doesn't work, in my opinion, and or I'm not comfortable with it, I'll turn it down. It's just like I don't know. I like to think pretty critically about that stuff. It's always exciting though. Like man, sometimes I'll get an email like that one. I just remember calling my dad and I'm like, so Dad, I'm on a song with Michael Bublé. I just and my dad's like, oh yeah, okay, holy,
Yeah.
like like it's hard to contain the excitement. The one thing I've learned though, being in this industry is you can't be excited until it's happened, because like there's been so many opportunities I've had that I've been standing at the gate of that have been working on projects before and television shows and et cetera, and then they pivot last minute.
Oh yeah, like no, I can totally relate to that because it's like, when we send out, just say on this podcast, interviews for, if we're looking at acts in the States, like just say a Halsey, or if you're reaching out to like say Tennille Towns or some of these acts and like, they'll come back to you and say like, oh, she's very interested. And then like you're already in your mind going, great, let's set up the date, let's do this. I've got my questions ready, blah blah blah. And then they'll come back and be like, not yet though, because there's nothing to promote, or can you wait a couple like a year down the road? And I'm like, oh man, like I was false excited, and it's like now we don't know if this is gonna happen. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Until it actually happens, it's more or less like, and some people might look at that like, just say if you got off the phone with someone and you did tell them like, hey, I'm gonna be on the, or I'm gonna be singing with all these people, and they're like, geez, you think you'd be more excited? You'd be like, easy. Between now and when that happens, anything could change. Buble could like back out and say, I've got other bubbly commercials to do, or like anything of that nature.
Yeah, truly, yeah. I mean that, and that's the thing is like, I mean, I just like, when you see it exist and people are watching it or consuming it or whatever, it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, that feels
Yeah.
great. But you know it is. Oh man.
It's like it's not finalized until you actually get through it. Like I used to hear the coin of phrase of like, unless you get it in writing, pretty much like don't right. And
Yeah.
in the podcast world, it's like, well, it's hard to get it in writing, maybe in an email, but sometimes an email can even be like, I didn't mean it when I said it that way. I'm like, okay. So it's almost like until you actually edit the episode, post the episode, then it happened. I'm at that point where someone will say to me like, didn't you do that interview like 3 weeks ago and didn't you like edit it? I'm like, yeah, but until it's posted, it's basically anything could happen to that. That like they could email me the next day and be like,
Oh
hey,
yeah.
you got to scrap that interview because this happened. So yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from. I kind of am interested in just the concept of the name Bad Child because actually what I was going to do as a funny pun to start off this episode was I was going to play some bad boys, what you gonna do? But I was like, man, what about if he doesn't like that song? And what about if he totally takes that as like, hey, what kind of joker is on this other end of the phone?
No, that's funny as hell, man. It's all good.
So where did you come up with like the idea or the name of like Bad Child?
Well, I mean, I was fresh in high school. I think it was 18, just getting out of high school, and I put the song "Bad Child" out. It was the first song I ever wrote, ever finished. I put it out. It blew up online. I was just going by my name. I was just going by Isaiah, and then I was like, oh, maybe it should just be like a thing. Maybe I should just name my project "Bad Child," and obviously there's like connotations with that. I don't consider bad child as in like it's like a cool thing where it's like, yo, he's bad.
Yeah.
I always consider
Yeah.
it as like you're not good enough. You know what I mean? It's about like being doubtful of, how you're yourself. Like you literally don't feel like a good child. Like it's like there's this like redemption in it that I find really exciting.
No, absolutely. The other thing that I kind of want to kind of poke fun here a little bit at because it's like there's a band I think they're from I want to say Australia. I could be wrong, but like it's Tones and and they have a song called Bad Child. And like
Oh,
I was like, do you
yeah.
ever feel like when people like do you feel like that's a good publicity kind of for you because when people look up Bad Child, they might come across that, but then they're like, oh, there's this guy named Bad Child, but also it's kind of funny because in the world we live in now, and I think it's like good timing for you as well, is in the WWE world they have Bad Bunny. So it's almost like someone's like, oh man, like what's that person's name? It's Bad something, and it's like, oh, it's definitely Child Bunny or something, and then they stumble across you like just by stumbling, like doing all this research, and it's like, you know what? I was here for Bad Bunny, but I stumbled across Bad Child, and I'm gonna stay with this. So I mean, it's a perfect time to have your name as Bad something.
Yeah, truthfully, man, that's the thing. I feel really happy about the name I chose. You know what I mean? It doesn't. I don't feel limited by it. There's a ton of good ops there.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like you know what that should be like your. I'm putting words in the mouth there, but that should be like your future goal one day to be like performing with Tones and they're like singing Bad Child, and then the next minute you come out on stage and they're like, we've been singing Bad Child this whole time, but here is the actual Bad Child, and then you do your thing, and then it's like, man, that's a perfect combo right there.
Yeah, we gotta set this up.
Yeah, yeah. I will contact them personally and just be like, hey, you know that song you're singing? We actually have an artist with that name. I want to talk to a little bit about on the personal side here because I read, and again, this is totally, if you don't want to talk about it, it's totally up to you. But I read that like you lost your mom at a young age. If you don't mind me asking, like, what exactly was like the cause and how did this kind of affect you moving forward?
Yeah, we can talk a bit about that. I mean, I was 16, like still in high school and stuff, and she had struggled with a lot of different stuff in her lifetime, and she had something called a heart arrhythmia, and so her heart just stopped in her chest one day while we were at school, and yeah, it was a really like traumatic experience. I mean, I was the one that found her, and it was like a whole thing. Like like I know first aid and all that, so it was really intense. And obviously that affected me a lot. Like I got diagnosed with like post traumatic stress disorder from a lot of the stuff I experienced in that time period. But a lot of ways music saved me because that part of my life was, you know what I mean? Like I can't even describe like the people I was around, those experiences. I saw 4 people die like in in front of me when I was not even 18. And like I don't really talk very much about that stuff, but like that had very long term lasting mental health effects, and that I struggle with every day. But I'm trying to be a lot more vocal about it because I think it's an important thing for people to know, like, hey, like that shit happens in life, and when it does, like, you need to know that you're not weird for feeling undo.
Yeah, like no, and I don't I again I don't mean like to pressure you on it, and I like that you're basically coming out and saying like you do need to be kind of like a little bit more open on it, but it's just when you were mentioning, of course, about being like the first one there. I mean, yeah, I can imagine like the like trauma of that because in a similar way but different because I don't want to kind of relate it or kind of offend someone by going like, well, that's not similar at all, but like I had a friend that passed away from like a car crash, and you don't really like you weren't close with them for maybe about a year just because things change, but like it still kind of affects you to this day. So I can imagine if someone's like losing a parent at a young age, because I've had classmates that did, and like you're just looking at it when you're like maybe 15 or 16, being like, it just kind of goes over your head. You always think that your mom or dad's always going to be there until you get older, and then when they're not, you're kind of like, how do you be there for that person per
Yeah,
se? Like how do you at least show that person that like I'm here for you, but I don't know exactly how to be because I haven't gone through this. Like I think in a weird way, an example of it is like I used to grow up. I grew up watching Friends, and it was just to me it was like just humor. But there's a part of it when Phoebe thinks that her mom is a cat, and Ross goes, "No, this is like so and so the cat," and Phoebe goes, "Have you ever lost a parent?" And then he goes, "No," and she goes, "Well, you don't know what it's like when one comes back." And like, there's of course a laugh track to it, but I'm like, but in her mind, that's just her way of coping. Like it's her way of being like, this could like to me, this is my mom, and why does this affect you? Like, why are you so upset that I think this cat is my mom? And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like, how can he relate to that? So I'm not saying in any aspect that you went to an animal and said, you're my mom, but like you get what I'm getting at is like, how do you relate to a person?
no,
Yeah.
but oh no, completely. And you don't, and I mean, like, that was the thing. I remember, obviously not knowing how to feel afterwards, and going to school again, like the week after. I don't even think it was a week. I think it was like 4 or 5 days I just spent sleeping, and I was like, yeah, I need to go back to school and like just continue my life. And I remember the first. It's kind of funny in the fucked up way, but when I got to school, this kid walks up to me. He's like, "Oh my god, dude, are you okay?" I'm like, "Well, as much as I can be." And this kid's like, "I would have killed myself, man. That's crazy." And I was like, "What?" I was like,
Yeah.
"Yo,
Yeah.
don't say that to me right now." I was like, "What is that energy?" But like, that whole thing. Like, I don't think I was a popular kid. I mean, I kind of got along with everybody, but after that, man, like, lots of people started to like be really weird around me because I think I reminded them of mortality or something. And like, this is like that kid, and like all I did all day was art. Like, I didn't do a whole lot else. Like it was just like a place I went to like escape that, because it was like, oh man, these people think I'm weird.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because like I can kind of relate to it in like two sides because like the kid that came up to you and said, you know, geez, I would have killed myself. Like I think like there's a side of that that's kind of like that's how maybe much he liked his mom or like felt like, oh geez, like what would I do without like this person in my life? Like I can't live anymore. But yeah, like in another way, it's kind of like
Yeah.
maybe phrase that a little bit better considering the circumstances we're in. But yeah, and that's
Yeah, no, it was like it was sweet intention, but it was also like, oh man, why would you say it like that?
yeah, yeah. It's just like I said, like they don't know how to relate to it. And coming to what you said, kind of full circle here, is like when you said people kind of either treat you a little bit differently or don't know how to react. Like, for example, I tell my or people that listen to this podcast. I think I post on Instagram more often now, but I'm a person with a disability. Like I've had a seizure when I was 12 or like a stroke. And up until I was 12, I always kind of, I wasn't popular, but I always had people around that were like, yeah, we'll kid around with them, we'll bully them a little bit, but not to the extent of like massive bullying. But it was just like humorous. It's just like childish bully, whatever. But once you turned that corner where you had the stroke, it was almost like we're going to treat him with kid gloves. Like, yeah, we'll still bully him, but like easy, there's a line. And I'm like, I don't care what you throw at me. Like if you're going to bully me, but like the fact that you're treating me with kid gloves, other kids would be like, oh my god, I'm so glad they left me alone. I'm like, no, they left you alone because they're treating you completely different now. It's like they're afraid to like, you know, tackle you in football. They're afraid to hit you in the head with dodgeballs or whatever. Because
Yeah,
like,
and you miss out on those fundamental childhood experiences when you're put into that position.
yeah, it's almost like, geez, don't ask him to play hockey or don't do this because you don't know. You don't want to be the kid who checks him into the boards and he goes like in a seizure mode. And you're like, okay, like relax. Like just treat me like you did beforehand. And if that happens, it happens. Like, you know, if anything, make it feel more normal, not like less normal.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I can really identify with that story. Like I grew up with a heart condition, so I wasn't allowed to, be very physically active until I was, at an age where they were sure my heart wasn't going to explode in my chest.
Because that's all you want to see, right? Like in the middle of a soccer game, just be like, I think that kid just exploded over there. It's like,
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Oh my god.
But of course, with all this, like I don't want to make it to sound like well, maybe in a way, it's like the silver lining, I guess, of all this is like, going through the depression, like I guess the loneliness of it all, and like just trying to find yourself. I guess you kind of became like a self-taught singer, a writer, a producer, like as a way of coping. And this brings it back to, getting into the music side of things. So like when you look at it from that perspective, and like I said earlier, seeing your songs go on, say, Netflix, Apple, like Radio Canada, and that, like, do you kind of look at it in the silver lining sense of going, more or less like, this is what I've accomplished, but it took me a tough time or a tough road to get here, but you look back at it and say, I'm kind of glad I've gone through that. Like, not glad that you've lost a parent, but like that some people, when they lose parents or lose someone, they just go down a completely different road where you kind of said, I'm going through a struggle, I'm going to come out better. Is that like the way you look at it now?
I mean, yeah, immediately after all of that happened, like I was very close to going down a very bad road with, drugs and drink and all of that. And as I got into music, it's like, well, I think music is just like a reactionary, art. Like when I started doing music, I felt like I was reacting and understanding myself and my emotions. And it was like, oh, that's like truly special that, that feeling can transpire after, what seems like the end of the world. But, in a lot of ways, it's just the beginning.
Who were some of the people that you kind of inspired to be or inspired you to get into music or writing? Because I feel like, understanding this conversation and listening to you explain like all that you've gone through, like I can see why when Lean on Me came to you. It wasn't just, I feel like it's just not a song for you. It was like this had some kind of impact. But like, tell me some maybe singers, some performers that maybe you looked up to or idolized.
Well, I mean, my god tier list is definitely Trent Reznor, Nine Inch Nails. The Downward Spiral was actually the first album I ever listened to front to back. I was like, I think 11 or 12 or something. And I listened to the whole thing front to back, and it felt like he was like screaming at me. And I was like, yeah, this is horrifying. And I loved it. Yeah, it's just like, wow, like music has that power. And, then I really got into Radiohead and, Trent, Radiohead, Kanye, D'Angelo. God, I could go for years. Like Fiona Apple is a huge inspiration to me as well. Um, I just unparalleled talent. I mean, most of my heroes are people that I think carved their own lane sonically and didn't try to sound like anybody else. They weren't trying to imitate or replicate. It was just, oh, this is what feels good to me. And in a world with so much musical, homogeny, it's like hearing something truly different is so exciting to me.
Coming from that standpoint, like to me, like I grew up with pop music, so I grew up with say like the Backstreet Boys, like NSYNC, Britney Spears, like those types of music. But like, it's so funny to me because if someone plays a song of Eminem's "Sing for the Moment," like looking at that video and those lyrics, I get amped up. Like if I'm getting ready for a hockey game or soccer game, someone's gonna be like, "Brian, that's from 2002. Leave it be." I'm like, "You don't understand, man. This is amping me up." But when you were mentioning about finding your own sound or being something different, the first band that comes to mind, and some people will argue, I feel like people that are probably more musically gifted or like more musically like a genius mind than me, but Oasis comes to mind for me. Like it's just like a different sound because Noel has his own sound, Liam has his own kind of sound, but like to see them, I guess back in the day, do interviews, they weren't there for like PR per se. They weren't there to be like, this is our latest song, check it out. They were like, whatever, man, like what the fuck we're doing this interview for? Like, we could be out doing this. And I'm just like, I love that. I love that you're not here for this interview. I love that you're just basically like, we're here because someone told us to be here. We know you like our music, so like leave us be. And I'm like, all right, cool, I will. Like, but I'll still listen to your song.
Yeah. No, honestly, it's that attitude thing too, where it's just like, some people make music for other people, and I think those are the people that are like extremely excited for all of this sort of thing. But there's people that are like, I make this for myself, and I don't care if you like it or not. So let's just talk.
Yeah, like, and you know what? Like, I can't speak for them, but it's like I feel like so we've had acts on like say the Larkins that are like a UK band, and like I'd say like the 1975 come to mind where like I'm sure they do interviews and they're like grateful for them, but like I feel like they could care less. If you like them, great. If you don't, you don't. But if you tweeted at them, or like Fall Out Boy, same thing where you're like, hey, I didn't really like this song. They're like, great. Who cares? We did. So continue on. Because it's funny because I'm like a big fan of like say punk music too, but it's funny when you see like acts get to meet their own people that they looked up to, because I think there was a time that I had Mark Hoppus on music, or I think it was just Mark on music from like Blink-182, and he had Patrick Stump on from Fall Out Boy, and he mentioned the kind of the joke of him of like, do people come up to you after a show and say, yeah, it was a great show, but I didn't like that you didn't play the song? And Patrick said to him like, yeah, people did that. And he's like, I think I did that with you one time when I was younger. And he's like, you don't really think about it because it's your favorite song or your favorite tune they didn't play. But he said, as a musician, you're kind of like, it just deflates you because you're like, dude, we played 20 awesome songs. We didn't play the one that you like. And now you just killed our whole mood. And it's like, yeah. And I just thought it was interesting because like, if you ever have those moments with acts, you're like, oh, I've never thought of it that way. It's like doing an interview with Conan and being like, it's like, yeah, I really like this bit, but I didn't like that bit. And in your mind, you're like, that's just my opinion. But to them, they're like, man, I really gave it my all in that bit, and you're saying you didn't like it. I'm like, I'm sorry, like I just didn't. And they're like, okay, well, screw you.
Well, I think that's the one thing that is like yeah, I think worthless about certain critiques is it's just like when everything's done and you finished it and you don't have an option to go back in time and change it. Why are you telling me that? What Where does that information go? Like, is there like a closet in my brain that's supposed to sit in, and I could just like like what is the purpose of learning that? I remember doing like a high school play, and I got coaxed into doing this thing, and I was like, oh hell, like I'll do it. And I did it, and yeah, it was fine. And the last night, like the whole thing, I finished it, and the director walks up to me. He's like, "You sang better yesterday." And I'm like, why would you tell me that? Like, it's not going to go anywhere. We're not playing tomorrow. Why would you tell me that? That's just going to sit in my brain now. It's just going to take space up. Like,
I feel like it's almost like they just don't really think about it. It's like it's just something that comes in their mind. It's almost as if they're telling you, like, just down the road, if you ever do something 2 or 3 years from now, just remember, don't sing like you did tonight. Sing like you did the other night. It's like, okay. But that's like 2 or 3 years down the road from now. It's like maybe things have changed. Maybe my voice changes. Maybe then I'm better than the night that you're referring to. Or maybe you'll come up to me that night and be like, hey, actually, I seen you 2 nights ago and you sang better that night. It's like, can you just stop? Leave me alone. Like just enjoy it or don't enjoy it. So to kind of clue it up here with Bad Child here, I wanted you to kind of talk a little bit about your latest song. And how that kind of came to be, and what do you expect, I guess, in 2021?
Well, $1,000,000 was a funny journey for me. I mean, a lot of it was inspired by going to the corner store with my grandmother when I was a kid. It was the sounds of the lottery machines, in corner stores. It's so bizarre to me, and just hearing like winner gagnon, just like shout out and. Annoying lights and stuff flashing on it. I always thought it was funny. She'd always say, "Oh, go buy a scratch ticket, and we're gonna win $1,000,000 tonight." And I always was always like, "Wow, yeah, so money is gonna fix everything," which it won't. But that's the song is almost a sarcastic take on that. It's like the futility of money in the face of love and companionship and friendship. Like I think it's like all of the verses on that song are supposed to be this overblown hype train of like we're robbing a bank, we're running from the police, like you're gonna make so much money, blah blah blah. It's just that old adage. And I thought singing it sarcastically and then arriving at that chorus, where it talks about it, and it's like, well, this doesn't mean anything without you. So it doesn't mean anything at all. Like, and at least sonically, I wanted that song to sound like the inside of a lottery machine, like that, just bizarre. Like when I feel like Vegas, I wanted it to feel disgusting, like a pop-up advertisement, and be shrill and annoying. And I think I accomplished it.
That's going to do it for this episode of Tobin Tonight. Our thanks to Bad Child for coming on to the show. Remember, you can find past, present, and future episodes on TobinTonight.com, Spotify, and iTunes. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and leave a comment or two. For Tobin and myself, this is Jacob saying thank you for listening and good night.